This episode is sponsored by Simply Safe. Today, I'll be casting this tree, which I harvested, milled, and framed in epoxy to make a one-of-a-kind door for the cabin. Now, epoxy can be a finicky material to work with. For it to properly cure, it can't be too hot, too cold, or too humid. Otherwise, it will deform, discolor, or fail to cure altogether. So before I can pour the epoxy, the cabin's back entrance will need to be closed off, so that I can more easily control the interior temperature during the curing process, especially during these frosty fall nights. If only I had a door to close the entrance with. Instead, I'll be making a pair of insulated shutters, which will come in handy even after the epoxy door has been made. Both shutters are now complete, and just in time too because it's beginning to rain. Anyway, these shutters are 3 inches thick with 2 inches of foam board insulation, so they're going to do a great job of keeping the warm air inside the cabin and the cold air outside where it belongs. Now, some of you may have noticed that I ended up switching the angled trim on the front of the shutter. Originally, they both went the same way, but that created this weird sort of lightning bolt zigzaggy pattern, which I wasn't a big fan of. So I switched the one piece of trim so that they now mirror each other, and I think that makes a much more pleasant design, especially when the shutters are put together. It'll create a nice diamond pattern, which is different from what it would have looked like before if the braces were going the same way. It would have made a zigzaggy Christmas tree look, which again, I didn't really like. Anyway, I'm going to put these shutters on the back door now and get started on the epoxy door after that. Real quick, I'd like to thank SimpliSafe for sponsoring this episode. Right now, you can save big on SimpliSafe home security with up to 40% off new system orders. So if you've been thinking about protecting your home and family with home security, there is no better time than now. As for myself and my family, we've been using SimpliSafe to protect our home now for years, and we find that it's a wonderful peace of mind, especially when we're away, because we can use the cameras and the sensors to check in and make sure that everything's all right. The service costs less than $1 a day, which is less than half the price of traditional home security. Plus, there's no contracts, so you can start and stop at any time. The system is delivered straight to your door, and there's no need to schedule a service appointment because you can set it up yourself. It's just that easy. In fact, it only took me about 30 minutes to set up mine.
SimpliSafe on. Home.
I love SimpliSafe because it's easy to use and it offers peace of mind. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Save up to 40% on your SimpliSafe security system during SimpliSafe's biggest sale of the year. Visit simplisafe.com/theoutsider to customize yours. With the shutters installed and a warm fire burning in the wood stove, I could finally prep for the epoxy pour. I sealed the wood with a coat of quick-set epoxy to prevent it from bubbling when I do the big pour. prevent the epoxy from leaking, I caulked the inside and outside seams of the mold. This brand of epoxy is VOC free, but I wore a respirator anyway, just to be on the safe side. Well, here we are. The epoxy has been poured and it's looking really good. It's the end of the day now. In fact, it's almost midnight, so I'm really excited to get to bed. But as you can see in the background, I've got the wood stove going, and that's to keep the cabin nice and warm, especially during these late autumn evenings when it gets down to around freezing during the night. That's because the epoxy needs to be kept at a range of between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit for an optimum cure. So I have to keep a close eye on that stove. It does require some babysitting. It's not like your thermostat at home where you can set it and forget it. So that's why I've got my cot set up over here. I'm going to be spending the next 3 days just keeping an eye on the stove, making sure that it's at the proper temperature. If it gets too hot, then the epoxy might begin to boil and deform. If it gets too cool, then the epoxy may not cure at all. As well, it's going to take 3 days for this epoxy to reach a hard cure, and at which point I can break it out of the mold and begin doing a little bit of work on it. So I also need to keep an eye on the form to make sure that it's not leaking, and I sure hope that it doesn't. As well, if I see any bubbles arise from the wood, I can use the heat gun to pop those bubbles, just to make sure that the finish is nice and clear without any defects in it. For the next 3 days, I kept the fire fed and a close watch on the epoxy. Between those duties, I was free to enjoy the fall colors in the great outdoors, although I made sure to never stray too far from the cabin. Well, as you can see, the door is out of the mold. Now, admittedly, it's still looking a little bit rough, and that's because there are some surface imperfections that I'll need to take care of. But I will be planing both sides of the door and doing a final flood coat, and that'll get rid of the rest of the imperfections, after which this door is going to look crystal clear. Now, although this door may look light, it's actually really heavy, and that's because there's 15 gallons of epoxy in this door alone, which equals about 150 pounds of epoxy. Add to that the 15 to 20 pounds of wood that's in the door, and this door is about 160 to 170 pounds in total. At this point though, I'm at a bit of a crossroads because the temperature outside is rapidly dropping, winter is right on the heels of autumn, and although I really want to finish this door, I think I'm going to need to focus on the stone hearth next, and that's because it needs to be warm enough for the mortar to properly set. So once I get the stone hearth in place, then I can return to the door and get it hung at the back. So that's what I'll probably be up to in the next episode. But for now, I'm going to end this episode here. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. Stay safe, be well, and God bless.